Why, hello, everybody. This is Nicole Begley from Hair of the Dog, and I want to welcome you to our 6th most common editing mistakes pet photographers make webinar. And we are going to have a great time today. So to get the most out of your time, make sure you turn off everything running in the background of your computer right now. Your email, Pandora, Facebook. Silence your phone, close the door, and give yourself this time to improve your photo editing skills. And this is us. Welcome. I am Nicole. I am there on the left in the purple shirt. Nicole Begley. I run Hair of the Dog and also Nicole Begley Photography. And on the right is my friend Heather Lahtinen. She's an Adobe certified expert in Photoshop. Sorry, he's always barking. The mailman just came, or the Amazon man. Heather is an Adobe certified expert in Photoshop, and she has been teaching photographers individually as well as at the collegiate level since the inception of Lightroom. She's also founder of the Flourish Academy, and she's going to be jumping on this webinar shortly to help us go over some of these concepts. So tell me, what are your biggest struggles when you're editing photos? We are here to help. Go ahead and put it over there in the chat. Let us know what it is that you struggle with the most. Could it be your color balance? Is it having consistent editing, removing leashes, or calling? You know, sometimes it's even not even knowing where to start in Lightroom or Photoshop. But don't worry, you're in the right place if you're a professional pet photographer who's still struggling a little bit with your post-processing, either in getting the results you want or managing your time spent behind the computer. You're also in the right place if you love photography, you love puppies, and you're thinking of combining these two amazing things into a fantastic pet photography career. You're also in the right place if you volunteer your time photographing shelter animals and want to improve your post-processing skills so the animals look their best and they get adopted faster. And also, thank you so much if you're able to do that, because that makes such a difference in the lives of those animals. And you're also in the right place if you simply love your cat or dog and you want to learn how to harness the power of editing so that you bring out the true colors of your furry best friend. Okay, who has been overwhelmed when they first opened Photoshop and saw this? Holy cow. I know I was. This is me pulling out my hair, and this is what happened when I first opened Photoshop. Well, it wasn't really Photoshop. It was back when I started my business in 2010 with nothing more than a laptop, a Canon 7D, 2 good pieces of glass, and Photoshop Elements 8. However, when I opened it the first time, I was so overwhelmed because it's set up really very similarly to the main Photoshop. So I quickly closed it and I said, I'm going to need a book. You know, and the book was great. It went through the entire program, which was the problem. It went through the entire program. As pet photographers, we probably only need to know 5% of Photoshop. But the problem is, we don't know which 5% of Photoshop that is. It can be really challenging, so we're going to help you a little bit with that today. You know, when I was first introduced to Lightroom a few years into my business, it really made a huge difference in being able to edit my photos. And Photoshop also helps, but I do more and more things in Lightroom. It turned my world upside down because it made it so much easier to edit a session, and it sped up my workflow significantly. You know, it didn't take long to realize that I didn't want to be changed on a computer, and I became obsessed with efficiency in all aspects of my business. After all, time does equal money. All right, do you want to see something embarrassing? I've put this in here really for your entertainment and for those of you that are just starting out, letting you know that we all start somewhere, and it's okay because your work, as long as you keep working at it and improving, will continue to get better and better and better. So I'm going to share with you a few images of my first year in business. I was charging for these. Holy cow. All right, are you ready? All right, here we go. All right. Nice focus on my underexposed images where the focus is not on the eyes. It's not on the nose. It's actually on his little skin tag on the side of his nose. Pretty much nothing else is in focus because I think I was shooting with like 0.5. All right, not really. Can't really go that wide with an aperture. But this was truly, I'm not sure what lens, but I think it was well below 2.8. Maybe it was like 50 at 1.2. It was kind of crazy. And it's also a little green. All right, here's another. This must have been my green period because it's still a little green. And again, I don't know how to focus apparently, and I'm working with a shallow depth of field that's way too shallow because the focus is not on the dog's face, it's actually on their tags. Yep, that's the most important part of that image. There's no compositional interest. He's looking directly out of the screen. Okay, yep, let's keep going. All right, we're getting a little bit better. I at least have a cute expression. I got that going for me. But the lighting, oh my gosh, I had no idea what I was doing with lighting yet. It's like, oh, we shoot during a golden hour. Not realizing that the direction of the sun still mattered during said golden hour. Okay, so why did I share these? I want you to remember that we all start somewhere. That the only person you should compare your artwork to is your own artwork from the month before. If you keep seeking knowledge, learning at every opportunity, and continue practicing, you will keep getting better and better in no time. So let's talk about what we're going to cover in this webinar. This may be the most common mistake that all photographers make, regardless about how long they've been shooting. Heather's going to talk to us about setting our files up for success. And then I'm going to come back and talk to us about how to avoid the calling time suck. Calling is the bane of existence for so many photographers, but I'm going to show you how to call a session in mere minutes. It might change your life. We're also going to talk about how $10 can vastly improve your life. $10, that's it. The same price as a chocolate martini. This is a quick and easy tip, but it's going to save so much of your sanity when it's time to process your files. We're also going to cover why black dogs aren't blue. You can remove the blue color cast that often occurs in black dogs in a variety of ways, and we're going to show you a quick and easy way to remove the blue in Lightroom and in Photoshop and let you know which tool is best for different situations. We're also going to cover why the clone tool is not your best friend. You know, we have leashes on so many of the dogs that we photograph, and we have to use them for the safety of our subjects, especially if you're shooting in a busy urban environment. And there's leash laws in most parts. Most photographers start out using the clone tool as the only option to remove leashes, but I find that it's rarely the best option. We're going to show you a few other tools that you can add to your leash removal toolkit. And last but certainly not least, we're going to talk about a little bit of digital trickery. This simple trick is a lifesaver when you have to photograph 2 or more dogs together and it's just not going well. So I'll show you how to still manage to get that shot. All right, so are you ready to get started? I hope so. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Heather, and she is going to take it away for our file organization.
Hey, thanks, Nicole. Hi, everyone. This is Heather, and I'm going to go ahead and quickly share my screen with you so we can talk about the number one mistake we see pet photographers making. Well, to be honest, any photographer in that case. And we're going to talk about file organization. So do you want to know what the biggest mistake I've seen? I've been teaching photographers. I've been in business for about 14 years. I've been teaching for a little over 10. And the biggest mistake that I've seen over and over is they simply don't have a system. They don't know where their photos are, or they have a jumble of folders on their desktop. Is this you? Let us know. Is this you? You don't have to be embarrassed. It's okay. I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you develop a structure that makes sense for you. I'm going to go through a few things, and then I'm going to share my file management system. So first, let me say that I do like to separate my personal photographs from my client photographs. Now, even if you're not in business, maybe you take photos of just your pets, but I bet your friends have been asking you if you'll take photos of their pets, or maybe you volunteer your time. So maybe you don't have a business just yet, but you can still separate out those photos, your personal photos from, you know, any other type of photo that you would take. I highly recommend storing these images on external hard drives. It is not a matter of if your hard drive will fail. It is when. And operating system hard drives are more prone to failure than external hard drives. Now, by external, I mean you can plug it in via USB. It could be sitting on your desk, or you could have a separate drive mounted internally, as I do in one of my machines. You just have to be aware that data loss does happen. So you're going to want to make sure that you have your images at least in a few places. Now, let me ask you, right now, do you have a backup plan? And if your hard drive failed this afternoon, what kind of shape would you be in? And I ask that because when I established my backup plan, I wanted to begin with the outcome. And the outcome was, when my hard drive fails, I want it to be a minor inconvenience, not a catastrophe. And I've had several hard drive failures over my career. And luckily, they have been minor inconveniences because I've set up plans. Now, as an aside, I use a Drobo RAID 5 array because I have a very low tolerance for risk. And we can't get into all of that here. We would need an entire webinar to do that. But there are a variety of ways to back up your files. Just make sure you have them in multiple places. My background is mechanical engineering, so I'm very systematic and process oriented. When I'm thinking about a backup strategy, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. And what I mean by that is if you have them in one place, you might as well not have them anywhere, because when that hard drive fails, you'll lose everything. And if you have them in 2 places, well, that's as good as having them in 1 in case 1 fails. And I actually keep mine in 3 places, mostly because I'm a freak. And again, I have a very low tolerance for risk. So I'm going to jump in and share with you how I organize my files. I begin every year with a high-level folder that I create on my photography volume. Now, that's simply my external drive. I've just renamed it so that it makes sense. I create 2 subfolders, one for clients and one for personal. Inside of each of those folders, I have the months, 01 for January, 02 for February, etc. Now, don't miss this. This is really important. You might be tempted to name your folders January, February, March, etc. But if you try to sort them alphanumerically, that won't work. That's why I choose the leading 0 and then the number, so I can do 01 through 12 underscore with the year. Now, looking at my personal photographs, anything that I photograph in January is put into the January folder. I don't really care if it's a vacation or if they're birthdays or there's a holiday. Everything goes into that folder because I'm not going to use my operating system to organize my files beyond this structure. That leads to confusion. And when you're confused and you can't find your images, not only is it frustrating, but you lose a lot of time. Consistency leads to efficiency. Once I adapted and created this structure, I've never changed it. So I know exactly where my files are all the time. Now you might be thinking, well, what if I have all of these files in January and they're from all over the place? How would I find them? Well, we're going to use Lightroom in order to do that organization. I'm going to keyword and sort my photos so that I can find them within Lightroom because that's actually its purpose. Now, the only difference between my personal and clients is that within my clients, you'll see those smaller folders. Those are subfolders with the client last name. I shoot a variety of sessions at this point in my career, and it doesn't matter to me what genre. I just put the client last name in that subfolder. I want to drill down on that one just a little bit further so that you can see how I manage it. So in this case, we're looking at January, and that's my folder. That's Lahtinen. I would place the raw original files inside of that folder. And my clients get 3 different versions of their images. They get the high resolution for print in color and in black and white. And they get a version for web with my logo. I just like everything to be nice and neat and tucked in together. Now, I'm not suggesting that this strategy works for everyone. You might have a unique approach that is perfect for you. And I think that's fantastic. In fact, I'd love if you would share with me so that I could offer different options. But this might be a good place to get started. If you're not sure where to begin, or you're not sure that this would work for you, my suggestion is to get out a piece of paper and map it out on paper first. Our brains actually think better that way. So get a pencil and a piece of paper and just map out so you can see, okay, well, this wouldn't work. No, and you erase it and then you refine it. Before you even get onto your computer to create those folders, I would map it out on paper first. I hope that you found that useful. I'm going to turn this back over to Nicole for item number 2.
Thank you, Heather. That is great. I know when I started out my photography business, my files were a mess. So having a structure like that is really just unbelievably helpful. All right, so now we're going to move on to mistake number 2, which is photographers spending way too much time calling their images. So when I go to a session, I generally shoot between 350 and 400 images per session. That's quite a bit of images. So if I came back, imported them into Lightroom, and then went through them one at a time, I have to touch my computer at least 400 times, not to mention the number of times I go back and forth like this one or that one, this one or that one, this one or that one. You get the idea. Who has been guilty of going through their images one at a time in Lightroom? Go ahead and raise your hand in the chat. It's okay. We will not judge. There's quite a few of you. Yes. Oh my gosh. Your world is going to just, it's going to change for the better right here, right now. So instead of going through them one at a time, what I do is I go through my images approximately 6 at a time. I click on one, hold down shift, click on another, 6 to 8, here's 7. And then I can look at all of these images quickly at one time. And I can just say, I choose this one right here. I select it. I hit P for pick. It is now flagged as a pick. You can see the little white flag down here on the bottom left-hand corner of this image. And then I move on to the next ones. Hold on, sorry if I was pressing caps lock. That's what happens when I don't look. So here we go. I look at all these. Oh, look, I have one with the mouth closed. I'll pick that and one with the mouth open. Okay, we're moving on. See how quick and easy this is? There's nothing there that really strikes my fancy. So we'll go ahead and slide on to the next section. I like that expression, maybe a cute little moment. I do like this sideways. Okay, we'll do that. We'll go to the door. Do you guys see how much faster this is? We'll choose this one. Then we'll keep moving. Then we'll go here with these side looks. Maybe this one. Maybe this one. And then we go to the next section. His ears are back for all of those, but that's a cute one. And you don't have to worry about having, oh, well, I picked a couple side ones before, because we're going to go to round 2. So this is round 1. You simply go through quickly, pulling up 6 to 8 images at a time. And how you pull them up, as I said, is you highlight about 6 to 8, and then you hit N for survey mode. Somebody yesterday had a great shortcut because they said N stands for next to. So you can see them next to each other, because that's how maybe you can help remember it, because obviously there is no N in survey. But anyway, so we do N for survey mode so we can see them. And then we choose our favorites just by picking them. So I would go through my entire session doing this in probably about 12, 13 minutes. And at the end of that, I would have whittled it down from about 400 images to about 100. So I'm generally picking, 25%. However, 100 images is still far too many to show to my potential clients. So I need to cut that back, usually no more than 50. I try to show my clients between 30 and 50 images from their session. So that means I have to get that 100 down to 30 to 50. So that means round 2 is time for the Hunger Games of calling. So what we're going to do is we go right down here, this bottom right-hand corner, to filter, and we are going to filter and see just our flagged images. So these are the images we picked from that first round. So now what I do is I don't pull up only 4 or 6 at a time. I pull up like images. So I will pull up all the images of the dog at the door. And then this one's pretty much the same as the other one. So I'm going to select it and hit X to reject. So because I have this filter set on just my picked images. When I reject that image, it goes away out of my survey view, but it is not getting deleted. It is just getting flagged as a rejected image, and I'm filtering only the selected images. So therefore, I'm just not viewing it here. It's not in my film strip, and it's not in my survey mode, but it is still in your files. You have not deleted it. Okay, these two images are pretty similar too. So I'm going to go ahead and reject that one as well. And then we would pull up the next section, maybe the store area. And then here's one of him looking at the camera. And these three, he's looking to the side. So I would know right away, yes, I definitely want to use this image of the dog looking at the camera. So if I wanted to see these other images bigger, I will simply go right down here to the bottom right-hand corner of this image and hit this X. All that does is it removes the image from survey view. You can see it's still right down here in the film strip, so it's still flagged. We haven't done anything other than remove it from the survey view. Now we can look at these couple other images and decide which one we want for this view. So I think I like this first one the best, so I'm going to reject these two. So the great thing about doing this 2 round of calling, where you select in for round 2, and then you reject the unwanted images, you select in for round 1, and you reject your unwanted images in round 2, is say I then start editing my photos. I don't look at these images full screen generally until I get in here and start color correcting them. And say I pull up this big image and I see that it's a little bit soft, that I missed the focus, that I couldn't really tell when it was a smaller thumbnail. I can easily go right down here to my filters and I can choose rejected photos only. So then it'll pull up my rejected photos and I can kind of see my B-roll, I like to call it. These are the ones that made the first cut, but they didn't make the second cut. So I can find another side profile. Okay, we'll use this one instead. I'll hit P for pick. And then when I come back over here into my flagged images, this new image is right here and I can edit it that way. So that way I don't have to pull up that 400 image film strip and get lost in all that. I can usually find a great one to replace one that might have been a little bit out of focus. So I hope that helps you, because it really just rocked my world once I figured out how to do this and saved me so much time. And I can now totally get 400 images down to only about 50 and about 20 minutes and without too much stress. So there's that one too. Okay, so let's move on to number 3, the best $10 you will ever spend, unless it's a really good chocolate martini. No, the Expo disc is still better. All right, pop quiz time. Who is properly balanced? Go ahead and put it in the chat. Which image do you think is properly balanced out of these 4? Guess what? They're all a little bit different. One is the closest, but I still think it looks a little bit cool when I'm looking at it with the rest of these. Because 1 is a little bit cool, 2 is a little bit yellow, 3 is a little magenta, and 4 is a little bit green. So they're all a little bit off. This one is actually properly white balanced. And the hard part about white balance is that our eyes play tricks on us. When we think we're seeing the right color, it's because our brains know what color that cat should be. It knows that that should be a white chest and it's a brownish cat with greenish eyes. So that's kind of what we see. Our eyes start to get adjusted to the incorrect white balances. And the lighting situation in the area you're editing can also play tricks on us. So using a custom white balance lets us dial in the proper white balance right away. And then even if you want to adjust it on your own to make your image a little bit warmer or cooler for your personal taste, you can do that, but at least you're starting at the proper playing field. You're starting at 0 at the proper white balance. One other way that our eyes play tricks on us too is, have you ever edited an entire image or an entire session and then you sit back down the next day and you're like, whoa, why is everybody a Smurf? Those look really blue. It's because our eyes got used to it. So this just saves so much time in your editing. There's two common ways to custom white balance. You can use simple gray cards or an expo disc. The gray cards simply need to be held or propped up in the area that your subject is. You set your exposure and you photograph the cards. The rest is done in post, and I'll show you exactly how to do that in just a minute. For the expo disc, this is for setting custom white balance in your camera. So when you export the images after using an expo disc, they are 99% perfectly, beautifully white balanced. It is amazing. For the expo disc, I recommend you just get one because it goes on the end of your lens. So if you purchase the size of your largest lens, then you can just hold it up to your smaller lenses. So you do not need to go out and buy an expo disc for every size lens that you have. And how you use this is you set your subject up, you put the expo disc on the edge of your camera. You set your subject up, you set your exposure for the lighting situation. Then you put the expo disc on the edge of your camera, you walk over to where your subject is, and you just take a picture pointing back towards the direction of you where you were standing. And what that does is the light that would be hitting the subject hits the front of your camera, comes into your camera through the expo disc, and that expo disc makes everything an 18% gray. So then you simply go to your custom white balance menu in your camera and you select, this is what I want my custom white balance setting to be, and it will give you that custom white balance, producing beautifully white balanced images. And I also want to dispel a little myth. I hear all the time, Heather was one of them, but I move around too much to set my white balance at the session. Listen, it takes maybe 5 seconds, to set your custom white balance once you get used to it. It does not take long at all. And furthermore, the light at our sessions is often very similar throughout the session. If you're shooting outside on an overcast day, it's pretty much the same white balance wherever you're shooting. The only time it would be changing is if you're going from open shade to full sun. That's when you would want to go ahead and reset your white balance. But I promise you, once you get used to it, it is so fast. I really encourage you to give it a try. Here's a difference of how incredible the results are. This is a little gray card that I had, and on the left side of the screen is the white balance that my camera had. You can see it is quite blue. We were in the shade. And I had my pet's owner just hold this little gray card for me. I took a picture of it, and then when I came into Lightroom, I picked that little eyedropper tool where the arrow is pointing, and I just take that over and I click on either side of the gray. And voila, it has the perfect white balance because the gray cards fix both the temperature and the tint. I don't know about you, but I'm okay at trying to set a custom white balance with the blue and the yellow. I can get most of the way there. It takes way more time if I'm not custom white balancing. But if I'm doing it by hand, I can usually get there. However, if my tint is off, I have the hardest time creating a proper white balance just by playing with the sliders. So this is why I love my custom white balance so much. Once you set the white balance on that one image, you can see it's the bottom right of that film strip. I have that image selected. I then go ahead and select all of the other images shot in that lighting condition, and I do Command-Shift-S to synchronize my settings, and you can see I just have white balance checked. It's that very first checkbox right up there, and it will sync that perfect white balance to all of your images under that lighting condition.
I use that excuse, Nicole, that I move around too much at sessions and that, you don't understand me because you're not at my sessions and it moves too quickly. Really, the truth is I'm lazy because I should be doing more of that. Nicole's white balance always looks perfect and she doesn't rely completely on her eyes, but she relies on the fact that it's accurate. Okay, moving on to number 4. Let's talk about black and blue dogs. Well, let's back up. What causes a dog to appear blue in a photograph? Now, this is really noticeable with black dogs, but obviously any color. But what causes this is photographing in shade. And when you photograph in shade, you just get the blue color cast. If you're not custom white balancing like we should be, then you might need to fix it, which I'm sure you're wondering, well, how can I fix it? Well, there are a variety of ways to fix everything. When we're talking about editing, really the question is, do I use Lightroom or in Photoshop? And let me back up and say that really there are 10 different ways to do any one skill, probably in each program. So Nicole and I like to focus on the skill that we find is the best in the most efficient manner. So what I'm going to do right now is jump over to Lightroom so that we can take a look at this. So in this case, we have Milo, who is photographed in the shade, and you might not notice it from just looking at the image. Like, it might seem like it's color corrected well and it's fine, but I can actually notice that blue cast in his coat. So what I'm going to do is, in the develop module inside of Lightroom, I'm going to expand the panel for the HSL color and black and white sliders. Now I'm going to make sure that I have saturation selected, and I'm going to click this little guy. He's the targeted adjustment tool. And when you do that, you grab that tool, come over into the image, and as I hover in the image, do you notice in the right panel, in the saturation, there's a little gray box. It's jumping around because Lightroom is saying, hey, if you land right there, you're going to impact blue in the photo, which is exactly what I wanted to do. The way this tool works is I'm going to click and drag down with my mouse in order to desaturate the blue in the image. Now, you'll notice that it's pulling down on the blue and the purple. Now that's because all color is interconnected. And quite honestly, I would not have noticed that there was purple mixed in with that color. So that's where the targeted adjustment tool comes in handy. And we can take a look at the before and after by selecting this switch to the left of the slider. And I can just turn that off and then back on. And you can really see a difference with that. It works exceptionally well. Now I'm going to jump to another image. And Nicole and I were talking about this, and she says, you know, Heather, sometimes I just look at the image. I know it has a lot of blue in it. So rather than take the time to use the targeted adjustment tool, I'll just come over here and click and pull down on the blue. Uh-oh. Do you guys see this issue? The owners are wearing blue. Their clothing is blue. And as I pull down on the blue in the HSL panel, I pull blue out of the entire image. So this might be a point where maybe I'm going to try this in Photoshop. Maybe there's a different way to do this a little bit better or more efficiently so I don't have this issue. By the way, when you're using sliders in Lightroom, any slider, if you want to reset that slider back to 0 because you've been playing around, simply place your cursor over the point and double click it and it will jump back to 0. But let's take a look at this image inside of Photoshop. So I'm going to begin by adding a hue saturation adjustment layer via the adjustment panel. I'm going to select that, and rather than use the master channel, I'm going to choose the blue channel because I know it's blue that we're targeting, and I'm going to pull down on the saturation. Now, of course, we're seeing the same thing. We're pulling the saturation out of the entire image. But the good news is because we're in Photoshop, we have this adjustment layer that has a layer mask. Now, if you're not familiar with masking, that's okay. You'll pick it up, but basically it works like this. When you have a layer mask, if the layer mask is white, it's going to reveal all of the instructions that we dialed in this saturation layer. If this mask is filled with black, think of putting a mask on your face, then it will hide all of the instructions. So what I'm going to do is invert this mask. Right now it's white. I'm going to invert it to black by pressing Command I on the keyboard. That's Control I on the PC. Now it looks like nothing has happened to the photograph. And that is simply because I hid all of those instructions that I dialed in via that hue saturation adjustment layer. I'm going to press B on my keyboard in order to access my brush tool. And I'm going to make sure over here in the toolbar that my foreground color is white. That is, that I have a white brush. I need to make this brush bigger with my right bracket key. I'm also going to soften the edge of that brush with a shift and a left bracket key. Now the bracket keys are located above your enter or return key, and they're worth noting because those are the same keyboard shortcuts in Lightroom. Anything related to a brush tool, the bracket keys make it bigger or smaller. And now what I can do is just click and drag and brush over Milo in order to remove the blue from his coat. So what's happening is I'm painting with a white brush on a black mask, and it is revealing those instructions that I dialed in. So now if I turn that on and off, you can see the before and after. And I would need to make the brush smaller and make sure I got his ears really well and go around and be very clean with this edit. But hopefully you can see that you can remove the blue just from the pet by using a hue saturation adjustment layer combined with layer masks inside of Photoshop. I'm going to jump back into Keynote to cover issue number 5, no cloning around. So you might be asking yourself, well, is cloning bad? And the answer is no. Cloning is not bad. I use the clone stamp very often. It's just you have to know how to use other tools in order to correct issues that the clone stamp either can't correct or just messes up. Because it really does work well in certain situations, but not in all. And the reason is this. The clone stamp simply copies pixels from one area of the photograph and pastes them to another area. That's its job. That's what the word clone means. Copy, paste. But if you look at the other healing tools inside of Photoshop, many of them will copy, paste, and then blend the pixels. And that's a really important distinction. So when I think about all of the healing tools available in Photoshop, they really either fall into one of these categories. Either it's clone, it's copy, paste, or it's a healing tool, which copies, pastes, and then blends the pixels. And we all know that happy pixels equal happy dogs. We don't want any angry pixels over here. The spot healing brush can quickly remove leashes, and I love using that tool for leashes, and I'm going to show you that in just a second. The patch tool can work wonders. It's actually shocking to me sometimes how well this works, but probably out of all of these, one of my favorite tools is the content aware fill. It really is magic. It was introduced in Photoshop CS5. I will never forget it. When we learned it, it was like, hallelujah. There was so much we can do with this tool. But the key to all of these tools, I mean, there are several tools in order to do things inside of Photoshop in terms of healing or removing leashes or altering the background. The key is you cannot be afraid to mix and match these tools. You might start with one and end with another. You might try one and it doesn't work at all, so you have to move to another. So let's jump into Photoshop, and I'm going to demonstrate a few of these right now so we can take a look at these different tools. And we are going to begin with the clone stamp. Now, one of the first things I like to do when I'm working on my images is duplicate the background layer. Because if you're working on the background layer, you're actually destroying pixels. And we don't destroy pixels in this house. So I'm going to duplicate the background layer. That's Command J on the Mac, Control J on the PC. Then I'm going to select my clone stamp tool, and that is S on your keyboard. And it is over here in the toolbar, S on your keyboard. And I'm going to check my tool options. That's at the very top of the screen. Make sure that everything is normal. The mode is normal. The opacity is 100%. And I'm going to show you how to use the clone stamp in order to remove this leash. The clone stamp uses a brush. And in order to make this brush smaller, simply press the left bracket key on your keyboard. Left makes it smaller and the right makes it larger. Now Photoshop needs me to define a source. So essentially, I have to tell Photoshop, hey, these are the pixels I want to copy. And then here's where I want to place them. In order to do that, hold down Alt or Option on your keyboard. When you do that, your cursor changes to a target. Then you simply click in order to define that source. So holding down Alt or Option, clicking defines the source. And then I'm gonna make this brush a little bigger. I'm gonna start to brush over this. And I'm just going to brush down here and see what happens. And if you're paying attention, you can see that we have a few issues with the clone stamp. And that is these weeds are sort of formed a repeating pattern, and it doesn't look really good. And in fact, that's not going to work for me. It didn't line up. I'm lacking some integrity, and I'm going to undo that so we can start over. So I'm going to undo that by pressing Command Option Z, that's Control Alt Z on the PC. And I'm going to try the spot healing brush in order to copy, paste, and blend these pixels. So instead of just copy paste, which is what we just did with the clone stamp, I'm going to copy, paste, and blend. In order to access the spot healing brush, it is J on your keyboard, but hold on a second. There are a whole bunch of healing tools that utilize the keyboard shortcut of J. So you'll want to make sure that you either choose it by clicking it or hold down Shift and press J multiple times in order to access the correct tool. In this case, the spot healing brush tool. Now, the nice thing about this tool is it's really what I would classify as an automated tool. That is, I don't have to define a source. Photoshop is going to attempt to look at the pixels in the surrounding area, copy, paste, and blend. It's an auto tool, which means sometimes it works great and sometimes it does not. But all you have to do is just click and drag and brush over the leash and let Photoshop do the rest. It really is quite magical how it's able to look at the surrounding area, copy, paste pixels, and then blend them. That looks really good. And as I get a little bit closer, I'm going to be a little more careful. I'm going to make my brush smaller. Let's zoom in with a Command or Control plus spacebar in order to access the pan tool. And then I'm going to make it even smaller and just click and drag and careful getting next to the coat, making sure that you're selecting small areas at a time. And I don't want to be a pixel peeper here because that's not an endearing term. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and look at the overall before and after. I think that looks great. Because I have eyes, I can see that there are a few artifacts. Those are integrity issues where maybe things didn't line up properly. If that happens, I'll go in with my clone stamp and I'll touch those areas up separately. I don't want to take the time in the webinar to make it absolutely perfect. I just want to get you as close as you can be. But that is how I would approach this using the spot healing brush. Moving on, I'm going to grab another image. And we're going to take a look at the patch tool. So we're going to use the patch tool in order to remove the leash on this photograph. I'm going to begin, as always, with a Command or Control J in order to duplicate my background layer. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, Command or Control plus, space bar in order to access my pan tool, or just move my window, actually, is what I needed to do. This time, I'm going to grab the patch tool. It's also J on the keyboard, but remember, it's buried with the rest of these healing tools. So I'm going to press Shift J until I see that my patch tool comes up. And there it is. Make sure I have it. The way this tool works is we have to make a selection. So what we're going to do is click and drag around an area of this leash. And when we finish, you let go, you get a selection. I know that I have a selection because I see the marching ants. Then place your cursor inside of the selection, click and drag to an area nearby and let go. The patch tool is looking at those pixels and it's copying them, pasting them, and blending them. In order to deselect, you can press Command or Control D. And so we're going to grab this area of the leash. You'll notice that I'm taking this in small sections just because I like to be careful. Now, notice that the patch tool gives you a preview. As I move around before I let go, do you see that preview it's showing me? And this is really nice because I can line up that weed in the background. I don't want to break the continuity of weeds, you guys. I mean, I have standards. So I'm going to let go and let that copy, paste, and blend. Command or Control D to deselect. Now, as we get a little bit closer, I'm going to pay a little more attention to what I'm doing because, again, I don't want to impact his coat. So let's be really careful in this area. And if this doesn't work well, and sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, then what I might want to do is press Shift J in order to jump back to that spot healing brush, make that brush a little bit bigger and brush over that area in order to just make sure that it looks really good. Again, if you see integrity issues, by all means, jump in there with the clone stamp. But let's take a look at the before and after. Few issues right there, but overall looks really good. Let's move on to the last image, and we're going to take a look at content aware. So what we're going to do with this photograph is first get rid of the leash and then remove the owner from the scene. This blows my mind, you guys. The fact that Photoshop can do this is magical, truly. But especially in a case like this. And the reason I say that is because the owner is pretty prominent in the photograph. Let's begin with a Command or Control J on the keyboard. Command or Control plus to zoom in. And for I'm going to start with the leash, and I'm going to use the patch tool to do that. So no, not lies, all lies. Let's start with the healing brush. It's been working pretty well for us today. Let's make it bigger with the right bracket key, and I'm just going to click and drag over a pretty significant area of that leash and let Photoshop do its thing. Few integrity issues there with repeating patterns. No problem. I can clean those up later. I'm just clicking and dragging with the spot healing brush, letting Photoshop choose the pixels around it. And if you don't like those areas right here, just jump over and grab your clone stamp. Option or Alt click to define a source. Oh, thank you. S. I needed to press S on my keyboard. Option or Alt click to define a source and just kind of brush over, and that will help with those areas a little bit. Except for that's not what you want to do. So let's make sure that we undo that. And I'm going to zoom out with a Command or Control minus on the keyboard and wait for Photoshop to catch up with me. So that's interesting. Photoshop is having a hard time at the moment. There we go. I just needed to wake up. Command Option Z to undo that. There we go. Okay, let's remove the human we're going to start with the patch tool, but then we're going to use content aware fill. Now, the reason I'm selecting the patch tool first is because it creates a selection for us and we need to make a selection. So there's one thing I want to caution you on here is you can't be lazy with these selections. So for instance, if you say I want to get rid of this human and you do this, you just click and drag, you make this selection, and then you go to, you know what? It's funny because I rarely go to it this way. I know the keyboard shortcut. It's Shift F5, edit, fill, and then make sure that this is content aware and say okay. What's going to happen is, first of all, Photoshop's going to take a long time to do it, but it's also going to get confused because I simply selected too many pixels. So let's undo that with a Command Option Z and then a Command or Control D to deselect. Now this time I'm going to select the human, but I'm going to take my time because there's this old adage inside of Photoshop that says select before you correct. And all that means is that if you take your time making a good selection, you will end up with much better results. So I'm trying to take my time and make this selection a little bit closer. When I let go, the selection automatically closes, and then I can go to edit and fill, but I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut of Shift F5 in order to access that. Or you could go to Edit, Fill, and say OK, and let Photoshop work its magic. And when it does, you can press Command or Control D to deselect, and that looks really good. Let's zoom in a little bit for those pixel peepers out there and look at the before and after, and I'm really shocked at how well that does. Now, if you want, you could grab your clone stamp, S on the keyboard, and then press Option or Alt, click in order to define a source, and just start to brush over areas so you maybe don't get some of those repeating patterns. Even though the shallow depth of field really works for us here, I see an issue with this weed. But again, I don't want to take the time to make this perfect. I simply wanted to point out to you that you can and should use a variety of tools when working with images, a variety of the healing tools to get the most desired result. You want to look for any artifacts or any repeating patterns. You want to make sure that you maintain integrity in the background. But let's be honest, if a person is looking at this photograph, I'm guessing they're probably paying attention to the dog and not the background. And again, the shallow depth of field really works for us here. So I hope that you found that useful. I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole.
Thank you, Heather. That was awesome. We are going to dive into mistake number 6, which is really not necessarily a mistake, but just not being aware of the digital trickery that we can use in order to save our sessions. So there are many situations in which having some of this trickery up your sleeve can come in pretty handy. Because remember, someone needs to be in control of every single session, and the dogs are in complete control of all of our sessions. So meet Aiden and Roki. Aiden's the old man, Roki's a young pup. And what's the one picture that every owner wants? They want their 2 dogs together, happy, right? Well, Aiden had other ideas. This is what I was getting. Not really the image that their owner wanted, but thankfully, I was aware of some of the tools in Photoshop, and I knew what I could use in there to still create the image that I wanted to capture. So I was able to take these 2 images, merge them together to create that original image you saw in only a few seconds. So let's actually head over into Photoshop. So we have our 2 images here, Aiden and Roki. And what I'm going to do is I am just simply going to grab my marquee tool, M for marquee tool right up here, second one on the thing, and I'm just going to select like half this image. I'm going to Command C to copy. I'm going to go over to my other image. I'm going to do Command V to paste. There we go. Now I am going to lower the opacity on this top layer. It's right over here on the right-hand side. I'm going to lower it to about 50% so I can see what we're doing. I'm going to hit V on my keyboard for the move tool so that I can slide this side around, and I'm going to start to line it up. So I can see right back here, if I want to totally line it up really easily, I can line up this grass right back here. Now the key whenever you're going to use this little digital trickery tip is for you to stay very close to the same spot so that your backgrounds can match up pretty easily. When it's an organic background like this, it's not nearly as critical as if this was in the city or an urban environment with lines and perspectives of buildings. If there's buildings and perspectives in the background, you definitely want to try to stay in the same spot to make this much easier. So anyway, so this is, we can line it up, but say we want the dogs just a little bit closer. So we're going to move them a bit closer right here. Right about there looks good. And then I'm going to move that opacity all the way back up to 100%. And now I am simply going to start blending these 2 together. So I hit the mask tool right down here on the bottom of my layers palette. That third one in, it's the big white square with the black circle in the middle. It creates this mask. As we learned before, white reveals and then the black hides it. So I'm going to just simply paint on, B for my brush tool. I have a black selected, and I'm just going to kind of brush on right here to blend these 2 sections. I'm going to blend down here, That's really all I need to do here. How easy was that? And then I can go ahead and grab my crop tool. I can crop into the image of however I want it, right about there, hit OK, and now I just need to remove my leash and I am ready to go. So literally less than a minute to bring these two dogs together in post because I couldn't get both of them to look at me at the same time during the session. Easy peasy. I hope you guys found that helpful. So why were you here today? I bet I know why you were there today. You want to know, or you know that there's power in post-processing, but the programs can be just so overwhelming and you don't know where to focus or even where to start. And really, you have two choices for learning Photoshop in Lightroom. You can do it the way I did it, the complicated and confusing way, watching a bunch of YouTube videos or post-processing classes that are geared towards smoothing skin and photoshopping wrinkles. Or you can do it the simple and strategic way and learn exactly what you need to know in an order that builds upon itself at a pace that suits you. So Kathleen used to rely on YouTube videos and books, but it wasn't working very well for her because she didn't know what she was missing. But she found success going through post-processing for pet photographers because it has the structure and an organized program for her to follow. So now she's working smarter instead of harder. And Heather and I have found that teaching people these programs in bite-sized, digestible chunks really is the way to go. So that's why we created post-processing for pet photographers. It's a complete tutorial for utilizing Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop in a way that is specific to the unique challenges of pet photography. Let's take a look on what we'll cover in the program. And the first module is all about the library module in Lightroom. And we talk all about the power. This is an incredibly powerful module in Lightroom. So we're going to talk about how to best structure your files, how to utilize the catalog components of Lightroom, how to create your preferences, import your images, calling, properly deleting your unused files, metadata filters, collections, and keywords. Again, so much power is in this module. Module 2 is about the Develop module in Lightroom. This is the workhorse module. This is where we go to develop our images, to color correct, and do all of the editing that we think of when we think of Lightroom. In this module, we have 35 3 to 5 minute videos that go over every single button in depth, and you can learn how to do 99% of your editing right here in Lightroom. There are a couple things that Photoshop's still better at, merging the images that we just showed you, oftentimes removing leashes and heavy pixel editing work like that. But other than that, Lightroom can do pretty much all of your editing. We'll also discuss the export modules in Lightroom, which are the book, slideshow, print, and web modules. And then module 4 is devoted to Photoshop. Not all of Photoshop, because that would be a 5-year class. We are just looking at the tools in Photoshop that are helpful for pet photography. We promise not to overwhelm you with lots of superfluous information on techniques that aren't important to you right now. We're going to talk about layers and masking, various leash removal techniques, content-aware move tool to get dogs closer together in a final image, merging images when you have 2 planes of focus for group shots, removing tear stains, color management, sharpening eyes, adding missing catch lights, liquefying martingale collars, and working with text and flyers, and so much more. In Module 5, I take you through my entire workflow. One of the great things about this class is Heather goes into how everything works and gives you all of the information on just the meat of these programs. And then I show you how I personally utilize it for my workflow. Now, you don't have to follow my workflow exactly. I just find it useful to see how people utilize things so I can adapt it to a workflow that works for me. So I talk about how I import, what I do for calling. I go at a much deeper level of what I went over today to globally editing an entire session in Lightroom. And I'll take you through a single edit image in Lightroom, explaining exactly what effects I often use on my images to create a consistent look. And we'll take an image all the way through completion in Photoshop, removing the leashes, sharpening eyes, adding vignettes with the history brush. And there's just a lot of meat in this work, in that module. And here is a sneak peek at the overview of the entire course. Remember, most of these lessons are only a few minutes long, so it should not be overwhelming. There are a lot of lessons here, but they're all really, really short and succinct, and really targeted. Again, this is the only post-processing course that's been created just for pet photography. Linda was one of the first people to take the course, and she loved how it was presented and broken it down, making it so quick and easy for her to learn. So what you're going to get. You'll get over 90 videos, again, most only 2 to 5 minutes in length. All videos are available now. It's 100% online with lifetime access to any future updates in the course. Exercise files to allow you to work on the same images that we're showing you the techniques in the lessons. So that means the images of Roki and Aiden, when I walk you through how to do that, you actually can download those 2 images and follow along with the images that we're showing you so you can learn how to do the technique before you go and try to apply it to your own images. We've also included some actions and presets to help speed up your workflow. And then what you'll learn, you're going to learn again how to set up that Lightroom properly, saving you oodles of future headaches and so much time for your future self. You're going to discover how easy it is to harness the cataloging power of Lightroom, explore every nook and cranny in the Develop module to create images with your unique style. We'll shave weeks off of your Photoshop learning curve by learning only the techniques and tools that apply to pet photography. Discover lots of new tips to allow you to create great group photos every single time. That one trick with Roki and Aiden was just the start. Learn how to call and edit a 400 plus image session in only an hour, and so much more. Speaking of more, we have a couple bonuses in the course. One of them is a whole bonus module on using a Wacom tablet. I have yet to find a photographer that can live without their tablet once they figure out how to use it. I know plenty of photographers that have had it sitting in their office for a year and they just haven't plugged it in. It is a life changer. If you haven't used it yet, it will change your life. In this module, we're going to talk about how to choose the right tablet, how to master your tablet, how to program it, and how to use it to get the most of it in Chrome, Lightroom, and Photoshop. Truly, life-changing doesn't even begin to describe the benefit of a tablet. We also have a private Facebook group just for students in the class, and Heather and I are very active in it, and we can answer questions that you have as you go through the content, give you feedback on your images and techniques. We are there to support you. We can help you troubleshoot and problem solve, and we even add some extra content in that private group periodically. There's also a straight out of camera versus final image video within the course, and it's a 20-minute video in which I take over 20 straight out of camera images and compare them to my final edited image. This is where you get to see me naked and see what my images look like out of my camera. Very, very scary. All while I tell you what steps I took to get them to their final result. In addition, we've also created this bonus for you on how to create a no-fail backup strategy. We're going to break down what you need to address in your backup strategy, review the different options available, and take you through each of our setups. Data loss happens, and our client and personal images are so valuable. You know, I've heard it said before that there are only 2 types of hard drives, dying and dead. So whenever your hard drive fails, which at some point it will, you want it to be a minor inconvenience and not a catastrophe. So this special training will help you be prepared. So are you ready? Are you ready to take your images to the next level? Are you ready to save time in post-processing and make your workflow quick, clean, and easy? I hope you are, and I hope you are thinking about joining us. I have a special offer for you guys. This course usually retails for $397 or 5 payments of $97. However, since you've taken the time to watch this webinar and invest in yourself, I would like to offer you the opportunity to enroll in the class for only $297 or 4 payments of $87. You'll get immediate access to all 5 modules and bonuses, and any future updates. You'll have lifetime access to the course. This is the URL that you want to go to if you want to go ahead and enroll. www.hairofthedogblog.com/pp4pp. When you go to the enrollment page, this is what you'll see at the top of the page, followed by many of the details about what's included in the class that we already talked about. There's also a sample lesson of using the Lightroom adjustment brush on the ever gorgeous Evelyn chicken. And then when you click the purchase buttons, it will guide you through the checkout using a credit card of your choice. Once enrolled, you'll be able to log in directly into the Hair of the Dog Academy and start watching your videos. Robin recently enrolled in the class, and she was fairly experienced in Lightroom and Photoshop when she enrolled, so she was slightly concerned about how much she might take away. However, she was so pleasantly surprised. She found so many impactful takeaways from the course and said it was the perfect consolidation of techniques that apply to pet photography. She said it has everything you didn't even know you need and none of the distractions of things that you don't. So really, no matter where you are in your pet photography journey, I am confident that you will find some great takeaways during this class. However, we know that you want to make sure this course fits your needs before enrolling, so that's why we offer a 7-day, no questions asked, money-back guarantee. If you log in and you aren't blown away by what's inside of this course, we are happy to refund you. Remember, it is jam-packed with goodness. We have the full post-processing for pet photographers course, our Wacom training series bonus, the private Facebook group, the straight out of camera versus final image training bonus, and the create a no-fail backup strategy training. So again, thank you for joining us. The link to enroll is in the chat or listed here on the screen. We are here to answer some questions. I know I saw some questions pop back up through the chat, and we are here to answer them. Any questions you have about the course, the material we presented, or any other burning post-processing questions you may have, go ahead and ask away.
Hey, Nicole, I'd like to address a question from Jay about the order in which we edit. So the way I approach editing, Jay, is I do everything in Lightroom that I possibly can because it will always be faster. So for me, that's exposure, color, cropping, some simple removal of things. Then I export as a high-resolution JPEG to a folder. I then take that JPEG into Photoshop and do any additional edits at that point. When I am finished editing the image in Photoshop, I save it as a JPEG level 10. Now, what that means is that it flattens the layers. So I typically do not retain layers in my images unless I need to come back to those layers to work on them later. So if I need to do that, I would save it as a PSD or a Photoshop document so that those layers would be available to me when I open the image again. But typically, I don't need to do that. Typically, I am flattening it and saving it as a JPEG 10, and then I can deliver it from there. Now, I want to point out, you can right-click inside of Lightroom and choose Edit in Photoshop. But I highly recommend that you don't do that. And the reason is when Lightroom takes your image into Photoshop and you work on it and then you save it, it comes back into Lightroom. And the theory is that all of the adjustments are kept together. And that's great in theory. But the problem is it explodes the file size. I mean, beyond all reason. I've tested it. It's nothing for it to take a 5 megabit file and make it 50. Which is crazy because then your hard drive would fill tomorrow. Therefore, my preferred method is to export my raw files to JPEGs, save them in a folder, and then open up those JPEGs inside of Photoshop. Now, someone else had asked about the spot removal tool and if it was similar to the healing brush inside of Photoshop. And it is. It essentially, the spot healing brush, it copies, pastes, and blends pixels, and it does a fairly decent job. And actually in the training, I show you how to do that inside of Lightroom as well as inside of Photoshop. So it really depends on what's happening in the image, how well it works in Lightroom. But I will tell you that Lightroom is always my first line of defense. I only take it into Photoshop if necessary to do more of the heavy pixel editing, as Nicole called it.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Heather. And my workflow is very similar to yours. I also export out of Lightroom, do everything I can in Lightroom, export out as JPEGs, edit in Photoshop, and then I store them in a final edit image folder in Bridge. Hold on one second. Oh, just sort on. Jessica asked, she can't think of what specific Photoshop tool causes it. I know, Jessica. This happens to me all the time. I think it's usually the patch tool. But sometimes I get a soft, blendy, smeary look when removing objects. What causes that is the tool that can best avoid that. So when I'm, Heather, you can jump on after, I just want to mention something here, but if you have something to add, feel free. When I am editing out leashes and things like that, I usually start with content aware. And then maybe I try patch. Maybe I'll do spot healing. You kind of have to test it out because one of them will not work on every image. They all will work on different images, and I don't always know which one. It really just depends by some random math equation that those tools are doing. So if I use the patch tool, or I use a tool that gives me that soft smudginess, like say it's in the grass and the grass is fairly sharp where I'm trying to remove a leaf or something, but then it becomes this like smudgy out of focus area, then I will Command Z to delete that. And then I find more luck doing content aware than patch. The other thing to check on patch, if you're using the patch tool, up on the menu bar where you have your different modes and the different settings you can have for that tool, there's a structure and a color. Make sure that's as high as it goes. I believe it only goes to 7. It's like a random number. But make sure that goes as high as it goes, because that's telling Photoshop to take the pixels exactly as they are and move them over, kind of like the clone stamp. And then also, worst case scenario, you can still use the clone stamp. The clone stamp will copy pixels pretty much exactly from using a source area for that. And another little trick, say there's an area and it's close to a paw, so you don't want to clone stamp onto the paw, you can use like the selection tools, one of the selection tools, to make a selection of marching ants, and then your clone stamp will only be within that selection. So you can make sure that it doesn't copy over something important in your image.
Yeah, definitely. The blending smearing issue is a result of pixels being blended. So if you think about it, if something is being blended, that's a result of using a healing tool. So remember how I talked about the difference between the clone stamp, which is simply copy paste, and the remainder of the healing tools are copy, paste, and then blend. Therefore, if you're getting a lot of smearing like that, you might want to try the clone stamp, as Nicole already said, just to copy and paste pixels, or try a different healing tool. I mean, it also depends on, is that area of the image in focus? Is it out of focus due to a shallow depth of field? Those are going to be a little bit easier. If I have to take my time to rebuild something to make sure that I keep continuity in the background or the pattern, then sometimes I'm going to use the clone stamp in order to line things up perfectly. It does take longer and a little bit more precision, but I typically begin with the healing tools because they're automatic and they're faster. When and if they don't work, then I fall back on the clone stamp. So hopefully that helps.
Perfect. Thanks, Heather. Laura asks, she's new to pet photography, wondering if a course in shooting techniques would be more relevant at this time, and wondering if we offer any courses and workshops. Laura, I do offer some workshops that include shooting. They're all full for 2017 at this point. But I must say that shooting is definitely super important. Keep track of Hair of the Dog for future ones. But editing, I feel like, is right there with shooting. They're both equally important. Even images that come out of my camera looking pretty darn good because they're custom white balance, I nailed the exposure, everything's ready, they still have to go through Lightroom. Heather, you might be able to speak to this. I don't know why it happens, but raw images, I don't know if it's because the amount of information in there, but they tend to have kind of like a little gray film on it. And they almost need to be going through post-processing just to up a little bit of contrast, get your color just right. So really all images still need to be touched a bit in post-processing.
Yeah, actually, that's referred to as digital haze, Nicole. So all images suffer from that, whether raw or JPEG. They all have a digital haze. But when I'm teaching Photoshop in person, what I like to tell people, Laura, is that it's important to know when you're editing, what you can correct and what you can't correct, because that will improve your shooting. So let me give you a for instance. If I'm out taking a group shot of a bunch of dogs and if I'm new to Photoshop, I might think to myself, oh, I think I can fix that in editing, or I'll try to fix that in editing. And then you come back and you try to learn and you realize, oh, that can't be fixed. The converse of that is I know what can be fixed, so I know what I can get away with in shooting, and I know what I cannot. So I know if I need to move that dog here or do this or move back to get more in the frame because of the way I'm going to edit. Good photography really comes from a combination of course, knowing how to use your camera, but more importantly, the editing, really, because it will give you a feel for what you can get away with. Now, I have a friend that recently said to me, wow, Heather, you're really good. You're like a real photographer. Okay, I've been in business for 14 years, but you know how your friends are. They think you have a hobby and it's cute. And I said, thank you. Yeah, I've been doing this a while. And she said, that image you took, she was describing something. And I said, can I be honest with you? I feel pretty good at how I shoot, but actually my strength is I'm an expert at editing. That's where I'm really good. So I can take an average photo and make it look amazing. In fact, it's practically a hobby of mine. That's not true because people pay me for it, but isn't that fun? They pay me to make these photos amazing. And I just feel like it's so critical to focus on your editing. Some people spend all of their time getting better at shooting, but their images don't really look to be improving because they haven't learned how to edit. So that's my 2 cents on that topic.
Yeah, and you'll be shocked too. If you watch the straight out of camera versus final images, my straight out of camera images do not look like the final image. I don't spend a ton of time on most of them. If I have a lot of removing of extra stuff, maybe I do spend some more if I have to merge images. But as a general rule, I know, that I don't want to overexpose my highlights. So my darks are really dark, but it's really easy to pull those darks up in Lightroom. So I can quickly and easily make these images just shine, even though they don't look like anything special out of camera. So yeah, definitely worth looking into. Another quick thing, where'd it go? Oh, Leslie wanted me to repeat the steps on how to use an expo disc. I am happy to do so because white balance is my own personal soapbox that I scream from the mountaintops because it's so life-changing. So an expo disc is just that little piece of plastic that goes on the end of your camera, on the end of your lens, and all the light that's coming into your sensor, it's kind of filtering it down and it wants to make it 18% gray. So what you do is you set your subject up. Say your subject is, in front of a house and you're standing up by the street, and you set your subject up in front of the house, or before you even set them up, you set your exposure. You stand by the street, you set up your shot, you set the exposure, you take a sample image, you're like, yep, exposure looks good, great. You walk down to where your subject's gonna be, you put the expo disc over the edge of your lens, and you stand where your subject will be, and you point your camera towards where you will be standing. So it's just kind of the opposite. You move your camera to where your subject is. Point it to where you're going to be standing. Take a picture. And then you look on your back of your camera when you play back that picture, and it's just kind of a whole gray screen. And then you'll be able to see too, this is pretty funny. Once you start using it, you're like, whoa, that's really orange, or whoa, that's really blue. And then you go into your camera settings and you just say, make this my custom white balance. And then your camera knows through the magic of its special little camera brain to take that either orange or blue or whatever color it ends up looking and making an 18% gray, which then balances all the other light. So then you're taking more pictures at that custom white balance and they look true to color, the exact color that it's supposed to be, just absolutely beautiful. So I hope that helps. John wants to know if there's any classes on shooting. I don't have any online classes on that, John, right now. I find that shooting stuff is often best in person. So keep an eye out on Hair of the Dog for future opportunities there. Do you guys have any other questions? Just a reminder, if you guys want in on the that special backup strategy webinar. I mean, it's going to have so much great information. Go ahead and enroll in the course in the next few minutes here. The course again includes the 90 videos from Lightroom through Photoshop through my workflow. Most of them are only 2 to 5 minutes, so they're really quick and so targeted, and you get so much value from a short amount of time. Some of them are a little bit longer just because they had to be. You get the private Facebook group, the special Wacom tablet training, straight out of camera versus final images, and then that fast action bonus webinar. And I wanted to mention too real quick about the Wacom tablet training. I know a lot of people have started using it because they hurt their wrist. Heather's one of them. I found that I didn't have serious pain, but I was definitely getting soreness from using a trackpad all the time. And so I now use my tablet. Unless I'm typing, I'm using my tablet and my pen for everything on my computer, and it makes such a difference to how my wrist and my hands feel. So it's healthy.
Yeah, that Wacom training is everything. That's one of my favorite components. I did a live video on Monday in the Hair of the Dog group about the benefits of using a Wacom tablet. And in this training, I really broke it down because what I found is I would teach it to students. Some of them would purchase it and they didn't like it, or it felt unnatural and they could not get used to it as a result of that. And it made me sad. And I don't like to be sad. So as a result of that, I created some exercises to help you understand and get used to the tablet. So the first couple of videos are so fun, and you go through these exercises just to get accustomed to the tablet. I've had several people who told me their Wacom tablet was covered in dust. They couldn't use it. They couldn't understand it. They took that portion of the training. Now they love it and they'll never go back. And it will absolutely save your wrist from repetitive strain injury, which I had at the beginning of my career. And the doctor told me to stop using a computer. It's hilarious. No, that's not going to happen. So I had to do something. It's just much more natural to use the stylus than it is the mouse. So that Wacom training, really, really valuable.
One last super quick question, and then we'll sign off here. Greg asked about the Expo disc. Does it matter what f-stop you take your shot at? No, Greg, it does not. One thing that is important, though, I use back button focus on my camera. So that takes the focus off of the shutter button and puts it on a separate button. And that's important to do for the Expo disc, or you need to remember to turn your focus off of automatic onto manual on your lens real quick to take your Expo disc shot, because your camera will not be able to find anything to focus on. So if you have your focus attached to your shutter button, you're not able to take a picture. So you have to turn that automatic focus off or move to back button focus. So hope that helps. Thank you so much, guys, for everyone being here. We so appreciate you taking time out of your day. I know everyone's super busy, but we really appreciate you being here. If you have any other questions about the course, feel free to email me, Nicole@NicoleBegley.com. It's right up there on the screen. And I will see you guys around soon. Thanks again.